On that cold December night, the Christmas lights twinkled through the streets of Greenwood. But for Amelia Collins, the world felt dark. While families gathered for festive dinners, she sat across from Paul, the man with whom she had shared 3 years of her life. Paul stirred his glass of wine, as if looking for courage at the bottom. Amelia still hoped he would finally ask what she had dreamed of so many times, a serious commitment, a step forward. But the words that came were like heavy snow, cold and unexpected. Amelia, I can't keep doing this anymore. She stared at him, incredulous. What do you mean by that? Paul sighed. You love Christmas more than you love us. The cards, the parties, the decorations, endless lists. I can't breathe in this obsession of yours. With every word, Amelia felt the ground opening beneath her feet. I thought you liked my enthusiasm. I thought you liked me. Paul avoided her eyes. I do. But we're too different. I need time. I need space. And just like that, without warning, he stood up, left some bills on the table, and walked away, taking with him not only their dinner, but also Amelia's hope for a future by his side. She remained alone, surrounded by bright lights that could not illuminate the darkness spreading inside her. Later that night, in her small apartment, Amelia stared at the Christmas tree she had decorated so carefully. Each ornament seemed to mock her pain. And as if the breakup with Paul wasn't enough, a phone call the next morning brought another blow. Her job as a reporter at a mid-sized newspaper was over. The justification was simple and cold. Staff cuts. Without a boyfriend, without a job, and with her self-esteem in pieces, Amelia sought refuge in the only thing she knew how to do well: writing. It was then, between tears and sips of hot chocolate, that a text was born, one she never imagined would change her life. At first, it was just a rant, a sort of manifesto against the pressures of Christmas. She titled the draft "Say No to the Perfect Christmas." In its pages, Amelia wrote about how people lost themselves in obligations, in unreachable expectations, and ended up forgetting the true meaning of the holidays. It was raw, honest, and without any ambition. Her sister, Sophie Collins, when reading the manuscript, saw something greater in it. Amelia, this isn't just a rant. This could be a book. You should send it to a publisher. Amelia laughed bitterly. Sophie, you know how many times I've been rejected? I lost count. But Sophie insisted. And weeks later, to their surprise, a mid-sized publishing house replied positively. Caroline Fisher, the editor-in-chief, saw in the manuscript an opportunity to reach thousands of people overwhelmed during this time of year. And so Amelia's book came to life. And, to her surprise, it became an instant success. Suddenly, she was no longer just the woman abandoned by Paul or the unemployed journalist. Now she was Amelia Collins, the writer teaching people to say no to Christmas. The only problem was that deep inside, Amelia still loved every detail of the holiday season. The book's release surprised even Amelia. In less than 2 weeks, Say No to the Perfect Christmas had become one of the most talked about titles in the state. Blogs, newspapers, and even local radio stations were talking about the young author who dared to challenge the tyranny of Christmas. Caroline Fisher, the editor, was full of excitement. You have no idea, Amelia. We're getting interview requests, invitations to TV shows. Your book touched people in a way no one expected, and most importantly, it sells. Amelia smiled politely, but deep down she felt a stab of contradiction. Because while she was being celebrated as the official anti-Christmas voice, her living room was full of hidden decorations, wreaths tucked away in the closet, boxes of red ornaments under the bed, and a small collection of Santa figurines she had kept since childhood. She loved Christmas, but now she had to pretend otherwise, to sustain the character the public expected. It was in this context that Mark Miller entered her life. Mark was an investigative reporter for the Greenwood Times, the city's most respected newspaper. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always armed with an uncomfortable question, he believed every good story hid a contradiction. When he heard about Amelia's book, Something inside him stirred with suspicion. A woman who built her career praising Christmas now decides to say people don't need it. He said aloud in the newsroom. Smells like an easy headline. And hypocrisy. The section chief quickly handed him the assignment. Mark, I want a full piece on this Amelia Collins. Who she is, where she came from, and whether she truly believes what she wrote. You know what to do. Mark accepted. But what began as just another journalistic task quickly became something more complicated. The first interview took place at a local coffee shop. Amelia arrived on time, wearing a red coat, her eyes tired but steady. Mark greeted her with a formal handshake, his recorder already on. So Amelia, what inspired you to write Say No to the Perfect Christmas? She took a deep breath. I spent years believing I had to handle everything. Flawless decorations, perfect gifts, parties planned down to the smallest detail, but it consumed me. I wrote the book to tell people it's okay not to meet every expectation. Mark raised an eyebrow. Interesting. And how do you celebrate Christmas now? Amelia's heart raced. She couldn't tell the truth, that she still secretly decorated her tree, that she still got emotional with Christmas songs. So she smiled carefully and replied, I simply don't celebrate. I choose not to be tied to those traditions. Mark paused, analyzing every gesture, every word. Curious. I heard people say they saw you in a decoration store last week. Doesn't that contradict your message? Amelia swallowed hard. I was buying a gift for my sister. It wasn't for me. Mark scribbled something in his notebook. He didn't argue, but his eyes said, I still don't believe you. The meeting ended cordially, but Amelia left with a heavy heart. That journalist wasn't just curious. He seemed determined to unmask her. What she didn't know was that later that same night, Mark would use a different name, in a place she would never expect. Because behind his computer, on the online forum Christmas Anonymous, he logged in with a profile he had created to gather ideas on how to make Christmas special for his niece, Laura Grace. His username was simple, North Star, and it was there, typing as North Star, that Mark, unknowingly, would begin to get closer to Amelia herself, without knowing who she really was. That night, alone in her apartment, Amelia Collins stared at the computer screen. The reviews of her book were everywhere. Some people praised her, saying she had freed families from the pressure of having the perfect Christmas. Others accused her of being cold, insensitive, even a traitor to the Christmas spirit. But nothing hurt more than the feeling of living a lie. Because while she wrote articles for newspapers reinforcing the message that it was okay to say no to holiday obligations, she spent hours secretly decorating her living room. The lights twinkled discreetly behind closed curtains, like secrets that could not escape. It was then, while browsing aimlessly, that Amelia found a forum called Christmas Anonymous. The virtual space was a refuge for people who wanted to talk freely about the holidays, whether they loved Christmas or, like Amelia claimed, were tired of it. Out of curiosity, she created a simple profile, choosing the username Santa's Helper. In her description she wrote, I love Christmas, but I can't admit it out loud. This is the only place where I can truly be myself. Across town, Mark Miller was also logging into the forum that same night. He was exhausted after a long day of reporting, especially after his interview with Amelia. There was something about her that intrigued him, that strange mix of fragility and strength, as if she carried a secret bigger than the book itself. But Mark didn't go on the forum to investigate her. He had his own reasons. Since his sister had become a widow, he had moved in to help care for his niece, Laura Grace. The 10-year-old girl was clever, sweet, and completely in love with Christmas. Mark wanted to make the season magical for her, but he had no idea where to begin. So, under the username North Star, he posted a message. I have a niece named Laura. I want her to have an unforgettable Christmas. Last year was really hard for her. Can anyone suggest simple activities or traditions I could recreate? The first reply he received was from none other than Santa's helper, North Star. What a beautiful gesture. Christmas doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be sincere. You can start with simple traditions, baking gingerbread cookies together, building a candy house, or even creating the 12 little Christmas gifts tradition, a symbolic gift each day until Christmas Eve. Believe me, for a child, that means more than any expensive present. Mark read the message with a smile. It was as if someone had put into words exactly what he needed to hear. He replied, "Thank you, Santa's helper. You talk about Christmas as if it were magical. May I ask, where does your love for this season come from?" Amelia hesitated at the question, but behind the anonymity of the screen, she felt free. "My grandfather gave me my first Santa ornament when I was 7. Since then, I started a collection. I think I've always believed Christmas is a time when the world can be better, even if only for a few days." Mark took a deep breath as he read those words. He didn't know who was on the other side of the screen, but it felt as if he had known that soul for a long time. And so began the nightly conversations between North Star and Santa's helper. They talked about Christmas traditions, childhood memories, hopes, and fears. Unbeknownst to them, every word they typed brought them closer, while in real life, suspicion and conflict grew. With North Star, Amelia felt she could truly be herself. And for Mark, Santa's helper became a companion who lit up even his grayest days. Fate was already weaving its threads, because sooner or later, the two worlds, the virtual and the real, would collide. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Amelia Collins. On one hand, she was the rising author, called in for interviews and praised by thousands of readers who saw in her book a kind of liberation. On the other, she was the woman who, in silence, lit her Christmas tree and hid wreaths whenever someone came to visit. The weight of contradiction grew heavier, and no one seemed to notice it more than Mark Miller. At the Greenwood Times newsroom, Mark was reviewing his notes about Amelia. She says she doesn't celebrate Christmas, but several people claim to have seen her in decoration shops. There are pictures of her near a bakery that sold Christmas cookies, and even more, he muttered to himself, organizing evidence. A colleague passed by behind him and commented, "Maybe she's just a normal person, Mark." Not everyone lives exactly as they write, but Mark wasn't convinced. Either she's a fraud, or she's hiding something. And I'll find out. Meanwhile, Amelia met her sister Sophie at a local bakery. Practical as always, Sophie noticed her unease. "You've been acting strange ever since that reporter started interviewing you. What happened?" Amelia stirred her cup of tea nervously. "He doesn't believe me, Sophie. It's like he's just waiting for me to slip up so he can expose me. And isn't he right?" Sophie replied firmly. "You wrote a book saying you don't celebrate Christmas, but secretly you live for it. Maybe it's time to decide who you really are." Amelia lowered her gaze. She knew her sister was right, but how could she confess the truth without disappointing her readers, her editor, and maybe even herself? That same night, back on the Christmas Anonymous forum, Amelia sought refuge in her identity as Santa's helper. There, she could breathe. North Star was already waiting with a new message. Laura loved the gingerbread cookies. She said they were the best in the world, even burnt around the edges. "I think I'm starting to get it right. Thank you for showing me that small gestures can be magical." Amelia smiled at the screen. She typed, her eyes brimming with tears. "You can't imagine how happy that makes me. That's exactly what Christmas is about. Not perfection, but love in the details." If Laura smiled, you already did everything right. Mark read those words like someone finding warmth in the cold. He didn't know who Santa's helper was, but he was increasingly convinced she understood the spirit of Christmas better than anyone. But fate, ever ironic, was already preparing the next step. The following day, Mark was assigned to accompany Amelia at a charity drive for underprivileged children. He watched her distribute gifts, laugh with the children, even help decorate a community tree. It was impossible to deny, that woman loved Christmas. And paradoxically, she was the same person who publicly claimed to reject it. Mark went home, confused, a weight pressing his chest. He typed to Santa's helper on the forum, "Sometimes I'm afraid people aren't who they say they are. And if you find out someone you admire is lying about something important, would you still trust them?" Amelia read the message, her heart tightening. It was as if those words had been written directly for her. She replied sincerely, "We all lie sometimes. Sometimes to protect ourselves, sometimes because we think the world won't accept who we really are. But I believe that when the truth comes out, if there's love and understanding, it's worth forgiving." Mark read it, closed his eyes, and sighed. If only he knew the person typing those words was the same Amelia he judged during the day. Winter in Greenwood felt harsher that year. The streets were covered in snow, shop windows displayed glittering trees, as if every corner shouted the magic of Christmas. For Amelia Collins, that setting was both a comfort and a punishment. She loved it all, but she had to hide behind the image of the author who said no to traditions. That afternoon, after a book signing, Amelia decided to stop by a Christmas decoration shop. She couldn't resist. The aisles were filled with sparkling ornaments, scented candles, and wreaths so beautiful it seemed impossible to ignore them. She picked up a few small ornaments, telling herself they were for Sophie, and walked toward the checkout. At that moment, Mark Miller, across the street, saw her through the shop window. He froze. The woman who, in interviews, said she didn't put up a tree, who didn't buy ornaments, was standing there surrounded by red ribbons and golden boughs. Instinctively, Mark pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. The journalist inside him shouted, "This is the proof I needed." That night, Amelia returned home with the shopping bags hidden deep in her suitcase. She barely had time to put them away when Sophie showed up unexpectedly, bringing hot chocolate and curiosity. "Hiding something from me?" Sophie asked, pointing at the bags. Amelia blushed. "Just a few decorations. I know I shouldn't, but I couldn't help it." Sophie sighed and sat beside her. "Amelia, how long are you going to live this lie? The book is a success, but you're betraying yourself. You need to decide whether you want to be true to who you are, or to the image others created of you." Amelia leaned back on the couch, exhausted. "If I tell the truth, I'll disappoint thousands of people. What if they lose respect for me?" Sophie squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe you'll be surprised. People need authenticity, not perfection." Meanwhile, across town, Mark was reviewing the photo he had taken at the shop. His heart was racing. He had the story that could expose Amelia. But strangely, instead of pride, he felt a weight pressing on his chest. He logged on to the Christmas Anonymous forum, seeking clarity. Typing as North Star, he wrote, "What if someone you admire hides who they really are? Would you expose them, or try to understand their reasons?" Santa's helper replied minutes later, "It depends. If the lie causes harm or injustice, maybe it needs to be exposed. But if it's just protection, a way to survive, I'd try to understand. Sometimes what we need most is compassion, not judgment." Mark read the words and felt his stomach twist. He couldn't explain why, but it was as if they spoke directly to his own life and to the article he was planning to write. Two worlds moved closer to collision. In reality, Mark was preparing a report that could ruin Amelia. Online, North Star and Santa's helper were building a bond that grew more intimate each day, and neither version of the story could remain hidden for long. Fate seemed to enjoy playing with Amelia Collins. The more she tried to avoid crossing paths with Mark Miller, the more life found ways to put them face to face. That week, Caroline Fisher, her editor, organized a charity reading event. Amelia was invited to present excerpts from her book and talk about the freedom of living a Christmas without pressures. To her surprise, the journalist assigned to cover the event was none other than Mark. When their eyes met, Amelia's heart raced. Not because she trusted him, but because there was something in his presence that both unsettled and attracted her. He greeted her with a restrained smile. "Miss Collins, we meet again. Seems like Christmas enjoys putting us in the same room." She replied, trying to keep her composure, "Or maybe it's just coincidence." Mark turned on his recorder. "Tell me, Amelia, what's the most important message of your book?" She took a deep breath and recited the answer she had learned to give. That we don't need to live under the pressure of a perfect Christmas. That we can choose what truly makes us happy. But when their eyes locked, Amelia had this strange feeling that Mark could see beyond her words, as if he could glimpse the decorations hidden in her apartment closet. After the reading, there was a simple gathering with coffee and cookies. Laura Grace, Mark's niece, was there, running around the hall with other children. It was Laura who broke the ice between them. She walked up to Amelia with a shy smile and a small letter in her hand. "Are you the lady from the book?" Amelia crouched down to meet her at eye level. "Yes, I am. Do you like Christmas? It's my favorite time of year. My Uncle Mark likes it too, even though he pretends he doesn't." Mark coughed awkwardly. Amelia chuckled softly, charmed by the girl's honesty. "Then, I guess we have something in common, Laura." The child ran back to the group, leaving Amelia and Mark in silence for a few seconds. It was a strange silence, uncomfortable, yet filled with something neither of them wanted to admit. That night, back at home, Amelia rushed to the forum, typing as Santa's helper. She wrote, "Today I met a lovely little girl. She reminded me why I've always loved Christmas. Children don't care about perfection, only about the joy of living the moment. I think I forgot that for a while." North Star replied shortly after, "Funny you say that. My niece taught me the same thing today. Sometimes I think she sees more than we adults ever do. Maybe we should learn the simplicity of Christmas from children." Amelia smiled at the coincidence. What she didn't know was that the lovely little girl she wrote about was the very same Laura she had just met, Mark's niece. Meanwhile, Mark closed his laptop, wondering silently, why did he feel such closeness to Santa's helper, someone he had never seen? While he continued to distrust the real woman, Amelia Collins, perhaps because, deep down, they were the same person. But he didn't know that yet. With every meeting, the line between Amelia Collins and the public image of the author who said no to Christmas grew thinner. She tried to maintain the role during interviews and on camera, but when she was alone, the hidden decorations in her closet seemed to shout the truth she was so afraid to admit, and someone was about to hear them. At the newsroom, Mark Miller organized the notes from his investigation. The photos of Amelia at the decoration shop, reports from neighbors who swore they saw her secretly decorating her window, even small details like the community tree she had helped set up at the charity event. It all pointed to one conclusion: Amelia was living a public lie. Mark stared at the computer screen, ready to write the article that could tear down her reputation. But his hand trembled, because at the same time, he couldn't ignore the conversations with Santa's helper. That night, on the Christmas Anonymous forum, the exchange of messages was different. North Star wrote, "You know, sometimes I think life forces us to wear masks. And when we see someone behind one, we have a choice: tear the mask off, or try to understand why it's there. What would you do?" Santa's helper replied without much thought, "If someone wears a mask, it's because they're afraid of being rejected. I wouldn't tear it off. I'd wait until the person trusted me enough to take it off themselves." Mark closed his eyes. It was as if those words were written for him, for the decision he had to make. The next day, Mark and Amelia met again for a local TV interview. The questions were light, but the tension between them was palpable. When the cameras turned off, Mark stepped closer. "Can I be honest, Amelia?" She crossed her arms, suspicious. "That depends. Will you be speaking as a reporter or as a person?" He took a deep breath. "As a person. I don't think you hate Christmas. On the contrary, I think you love it, and that you're hiding it." Amelia's heart pounded. For a second, she almost confessed. Almost said, "You're right, I love every detail." But out of fear, she only replied, "You don't know anything about me, Mark." And she walked away, leaving him with the feeling that he was closer to the truth than ever. Back on the forum, Amelia typed to North Star, "What if someone discovers a secret you've been hiding for a long time? And what if they could use it against you?" North Star replied, "Then that person has the chance to either destroy you or prove they really care. That's when you find out if their heart is made of stone or flesh." Amelia read the message with tears in her eyes, not knowing she was leaning on the very man who held the power to expose her in the newspaper the next morning. It was a cold afternoon, and snow was falling over Greenwood as if the sky were trying to hide the city under a white blanket. Amelia Collins hurried to the coffee shop where she had agreed to meet Mark Miller. He had insisted, "We need to talk." When she walked in, the warm atmosphere contrasted with the chill outside, but Mark's gaze carried no warmth at all. He placed an envelope full of photos on the table. "Recognize these?" he asked. Amelia picked them up with trembling hands. There she was, walking into a decoration shop, picking out wreaths, smiling at a lit tree. Each picture felt like a stab. "You've been telling the world you don't celebrate Christmas, but I have proof that you do exactly the opposite," Mark said, his voice firm. Amelia's heart raced. "You followed me. I'm a journalist, Amelia. My job is to find the truth." She shoved the photos back at him angrily. "The truth? Or just the version that sells more papers?" Mark hesitated for a moment. He hadn't expected her vulnerability to affect him this way, but he composed himself. "People have the right to know that the image you sell isn't real." Amelia lowered her eyes, trying to hold back tears. "And you never stopped to think that maybe I wasn't lying, just trying to survive." The silence between them was broken only by the clinking of cups in the coffee shop. That night, Amelia returned home in pieces. She logged onto the Christmas Anonymous forum as Santa's helper, as if it were the only safe place left. She wrote to North Star, "Today someone showed me they can destroy everything I built. I feel suffocated. Have you ever been afraid of losing everything because of a secret?" The reply came almost instantly. "Yes, I know what that feels like, but I believe that sometimes losing everything can be the start of something new, maybe even better. You deserve to be who you are, without masks." Amelia cried in front of the screen. How could someone she had never met understand her better than anyone else? Meanwhile, Mark sat in his apartment, staring at the draft of his article. The headline flashed on the screen. "The anti-Christmas author, who secretly still celebrates." It was his golden chance to expose her. But as he remembered Santa's helper's words about compassion, his hand hovered over the keyboard. Because unknowingly, the woman who gave him comfort every night was the same Amelia he was about to destroy. The next morning began with Amelia Collins' phone buzzing non-stop. Messages, calls, notifications. She hesitated before looking, but when she finally unlocked the screen, her world collapsed. On the front page of the Greenwood Times, in bold letters, it read, "The anti-Christmas author, who still celebrates in secret." The article was signed by Mark Miller. The photos he had shown her at the coffee shop were there, in clear detail, accompanied by a narrative painting her as a fraud, while building her career encouraging others to reject Christmas traditions. Amelia Collins secretly maintains her passion for decorations and celebrations. One paragraph read, "The phone kept ringing. The first call came from her editor, Caroline Fisher. Her voice was heavy with tension. Amelia, is this true? Did you lie to me and to the public?" Amelia tried to explain. "Caroline, I didn't lie. I just wrote the book as a way to vent. But I never stopped loving Christmas. I thought I could keep the two things separate." The editor sighed impatiently. "Don't you understand the damage? Our entire campaign was built on your image. Sales could plummet. I need to think if I can still represent you." Amelia hung up in tears. It felt as though everything she had built was being ripped away. On the Christmas Anonymous forum, Amelia wrote, as Santa's helper, "Today I was exposed. Everything I kept hidden is now public. I feel humiliated, groundless. I don't know if I can go on." North Star replied urgently, "You're not alone. People can be cruel, but they can also forgive. Don't give up. Sometimes falling is the only way to rise stronger." Amelia cried at her screen. Little did she know she was leaning on the very man who had knocked her down. Meanwhile, Mark was reading the online comments about his article. Some praised him for revealing the truth. Others accused him of cruelty, saying exposing someone like this during the Christmas season was unnecessary. Deep down, he felt empty. He expected triumph, but all he found was silence inside. Laura Grace walked into the room, holding a drawing she had made. She showed it to her uncle with an innocent smile. "It's you and the lady from the book I met. Both of you together, in front of a Christmas tree." Mark swallowed hard. The purity of his niece felt like a cruel mirror to the weight of his conscience. Amelia spent the rest of the day hiding at home, curtains closed, heart shattered. But deep inside, she knew she couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, she would have to face the world, and maybe even Mark. In the days following the article's release, Amelia Collins sank into deep silence. Social media was flooded with criticism. Some called her fake, others said she was just human. But to Amelia, it all blended into a deafening noise. Her editor, Caroline Fisher, suspended all promotional events. Her sister Sophie began visiting frequently, trying to pull her out of bed. "Amelia, you can't let this destroy you," Sophie said, pulling open the curtains to let in the light. But Amelia curled deeper into the sofa. "I'm not who they think I am. Not even who I said I was. I'm just a mess." Sophie sat beside her, holding her hand. "Maybe it's time to stop living for other people's expectations. What matters is being honest. With me, with yourself, and maybe even with the world." Meanwhile, across town, Mark Miller also found no peace. The article had earned him praise in the newsroom, but every time he read people's comments, something twisted inside him. Some defended Amelia, saying she was only human, that everyone lives with contradictions. Mark remembered the nightly conversations with Santa's helper, her words about compassion, about waiting until someone trusts you enough to remove their own mask. He couldn't ignore the feeling that he had failed. That night, on the forum, he wrote as North Star, "And if someone you admire were cruelly exposed, and if you had been part of it, but now regret it, can things be undone?" Santa's helper replied, "There's always a way back, but it's not enough to apologize with words. You have to show, with actions, that you truly care. Forgiveness isn't given, it's earned." Mark closed his eyes. Her words were both a burden and a hope. The next day, Mark visited his niece, Laura Grace. She was in her room assembling a small cardboard Christmas tree she had made at school. "Look, Uncle Mark," she said brightly. "Even if no one believes in Christmas, I do. Christmas is magical because we get to start over." Mark knelt beside her, his heart tightening. "Do you think even someone who made mistakes can have a fresh start?" Laura smiled, with the innocence of someone who sees more than adults ever do. "Of course, that's what Christmas is for." And it was there, before that little cardboard tree, that Mark realized he couldn't leave Amelia alone in the storm he himself had created. The cold wind cut through the streets of Greenwood as Mark Miller walked determinedly toward Amelia Collins' apartment. Each step was heavy, as if his boots carried not only snow, but also the guilt for the damage he had caused. At her door, he hesitated for a few seconds. Then he knocked. Nothing. He knocked again. This time, he heard slow footsteps on the other side. When Amelia opened the door, she looked pale, wearing a sweatshirt, her eyes red from crying. "What do you want, Mark?" "To see up close what you managed to destroy." Her voice was low but cutting. Mark swallowed hard. No, I came to apologize. Amelia let out a humorless laugh. Apologize? You exposed me to the entire world. You called me a hypocrite, painted me as a fraud. And now you think an apology will fix it. I made a mistake, Amelia, he admitted, with a sincerity he rarely showed. I became obsessed with proving you were hiding something. But I didn't see what really mattered. That you're human. That we all live with contradictions. Amelia crossed her arms. You had no right to decide how my truth should be told. I know. Mark lowered his gaze. And I regret it. I want to make it right, if you'll let me. Not to clear my conscience, but because I care. For a moment, the silence between them was filled only by the sound of snow against the window. Amelia's heart was divided. Part of her wanted to shut him out forever. Another part, the one that remembered the sparkle in his eyes when he spoke about Laura, wanted to believe him. Go away, Mark, she finally said. I can't hear this right now. She closed the door slowly, leaving him alone in the hallway. That night, Amelia returned to the forum as Santa's helper. She wrote, Someone hurt me deeply. Now they say they're sorry. Should I believe them? Or is it just another lie? North Star replied, If the pain was real, the regret can be too. But only you can decide if it's worth opening space for forgiveness. Sometimes believing again is the greatest risk, and also the greatest gift. Amelia read those words and cried silently. If only she knew that North Star and Mark were the same person. Meanwhile, Mark walked alone through Greenwood's illuminated streets. Families laughed, children played in the snow, and every light reminded him of what he had lost, Amelia's trust. But deep down, he knew it wasn't too late. He needed a gesture, something greater than words. Christmas Eve was approaching, and Greenwood was brighter than ever. Every street was adorned with wreaths, every house glowed with twinkling lights, and in the center of town stood a massive tree covered in golden stars. But for Amelia Collins, the date that once brought hope now felt like nothing more than a distant memory. Since Mark's article, she had avoided leaving her home. She didn't have the courage to face strangers' stares, unsure if they carried judgment or pity. Her sister Sophie insisted that they attend the town's community dinner together, but Amelia refused. I don't have the strength. I'd rather stay here. Sophie sighed. Then at least promise me you'll try to forgive yourself. Because Christmas isn't about perfection, Amelia. It's about new beginnings. Meanwhile, Mark Miller was working on a plan. He knew words wouldn't be enough anymore. He needed to prove to Amelia, in front of everyone, that he believed in her. On Christmas Eve morning, he went to the newsroom and handed his editor-in-chief a new article. The headline was simple, The True Heart of Amelia Collins. In the text, Mark publicly admitted he had misjudged her. He wrote how Amelia had inspired thousands to rethink traditions. But more importantly, how being human meant living with contradictions. He wrote, If Amelia loves Christmas in secret, that doesn't make her a fraud. It simply makes her like the rest of us, someone trying to balance expectations with reality. Maybe that's exactly what makes her so close to her readers. His editor looked at him in surprise. Are you sure about this, Mark? I am, he replied firmly. This is the most important article I've ever written. That afternoon, the article went live online. Sophie was the first to show it to Amelia. Read this, she said, handing her the phone. Amelia hesitated, but then scanned the lines. Each word felt like a step toward rebuilding the bridge that had been burned. When she finished, tears rolled down her face. He really wrote this? Yes, Sophie smiled. Maybe he's trying to redeem himself. Later that evening, Amelia heard knocking at her door. When she opened it, she found Laura Grace, Mark's niece, holding a red envelope. Uncle Mark asked me to give this to you, the girl said, grinning. Inside was a handwritten note. Meet me at the town square at 8 a.m. With her heart racing, Amelia dressed and walked to the square. Snow was falling gently, and a crowd had gathered around the massive Christmas tree. And there he was, Mark, standing in the center of the square, holding a microphone. "People of Greenwood," he began, his voice steady but his gaze fixed only on Amelia. "I made a mistake. I judged a woman for loving too much, the very thing she taught me, that Christmas isn't about perfection, but about authenticity. Today, I want to apologize not just to her, but to all of you. Because if there's been a fraud here, it was my inability to see the truth." People murmured, some visibly moved. Mark then put down the microphone and walked straight toward Amelia. "I wronged you," he said softly, "just for her, and I want a chance to make it right." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, the heavy weight she carried seemed to melt into the snow. The snow kept falling in slow flakes, as if the sky itself wanted to witness that moment. Amelia Collins stood in front of Mark Miller, her eyes brimming with tears and her heart divided. He looked at her, vulnerable like never before. He was no longer the cold, calculating journalist. He was simply a man, willing to admit he had been wrong. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Mark said, his voice breaking. "But I want you to know, I admire the way you see Christmas. Even with all your contradictions, you taught me that it can be about small gestures, and I don't want to lose the chance to live that by your side." Amelia took a deep breath. There were so many possible responses. Anger still burned, but something stronger lingered. The memory of their conversations on the forum. The words of North Star, who had comforted her so many times, echoed in her mind. And then, as if destiny had planned that exact moment, Amelia decided to take a risk. "Mark, I need to confess something," she said, her voice trembling. "Me, too," he replied, almost at the same time. They both laughed nervously. "You first," Amelia urged. Mark drew in a deep breath. "I'm North on the forum, the one you've been talking to every night." Amelia's world seemed to stop. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You North Star, yes. And that's why it hurt so much to write that article. Because, without realizing it, I was already falling for you in both versions. The woman I judged by day, and the soul who lit up my nights." Tears streamed down Amelia's face. "Mark, then I have to confess too, I was Santa's helper. The woman who listened to your worries about Laura, who gave you those ideas about cookies, about traditions, that was me." The silence that followed was filled only with the sound of the crowd laughing and singing around the tree. And in the middle of the snow, Mark and Amelia looked at each other like two people finally recognizing one another. Laura Grace came running over, holding a small golden star. "Uncle Mark, Amelia, you two need to put the star on top of the tree together." The girl placed the ornament in their hands. And so, under the applause of the community, Mark and Amelia lifted the star side by side. When it shone atop the tree, Amelia whispered, "Maybe Christmas doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true." Mark held her hand. "And I want to be true with you, Amelia, always." They embraced, and in that instant, all the mistakes, lies, and wounds seemed to give way to something new. A fresh start. Christmas morning dawned serene in Greenwood. The sun reflected on the snow as if scattering tiny crystals of light across the town. And for the first time in a long while, Amelia Collins woke up in peace. In the corner of her living room, her Christmas tree glowed brightly, this time without needing to be hidden. She no longer feared judgment. She had finally discovered that truth could be more liberating than any facade. Sophie arrived early, bringing hot chocolate and laughter. Soon after, Mark appeared with Laura Grace, carrying boxes of homemade cookies. Suddenly, Amelia's house felt like a home again, full of life. Laura ran to Amelia and hugged her tightly. "I knew you and Uncle Mark would end up together." Amelia smiled, touched. "And how did you know that, young lady?" "Because at Christmas, we always find out the truth," the girl answered, with the simplicity only children have. Mark chuckled, wrapping an arm around Amelia. "She's right. Christmas always reveals who we really are." Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. It was the warmth of knowing that, after so much pain, she had found someone willing to walk by her side. A few weeks later, her editor, Caroline Fisher, called. This time, not to scold, but to propose something new. Amelia, after everything that's happened, I think your next book should be about this journey. Not about saying no to Christmas, but about living a true Christmas. What do you think? Amelia smiled. I think that's perfect. Because now, she knew, she didn't need to choose between loving Christmas and being honest with herself. She could be both. That winter, Greenwood had never been so alive. And in Amelia's heart, something finally bloomed. The certainty that Christmas wasn't made of perfection, but of authenticity, forgiveness, and love. Amelia's story reminds us that we all wear masks, that we all live with contradictions. But the true miracle happens when we have the courage to be who we really are, and when we find someone who accepts us exactly that way. Because, in the end, Christmas isn't about flawless gifts or perfect trees. It's about fresh starts, about second chances, and about believing that there is always room for love. Thank you for watching this touching story to the end. If you also believe that Christmas is a time for forgiveness and new beginnings, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, share it with someone special, and in the comments, tell us, have you ever experienced a Christmas where you had to forgive or be forgiven in order to start over? Your story might inspire someone else. And if you want to keep feeling moved, watch our next video. It will touch your heart in a very special way. Here on Lasting Tales, we believe every story leaves a mark. And today's showed us that even in the coldest winter, there's always room for the warmth of true love.